Hello, we are going to be looking briefly at Acts chapter 24 today. And just kind of to set the table, remind us of where we are. Remember that Paul was arrested in the temple in Jerusalem back in chapter 21, and he spoke there to the Jews when he was arrested. He was saved, if you will, by a Roman soldier, a tribune named Lysias, while he was in this predicament in the temple in Jerusalem. He then spoke again. He spoke there in chapter 21, chapter 22 to these Jews in the presence of Lysias. Then chapter 23, he's still underneath the guard of Lysias. He's still underneath his control, if you will. And he now makes another defense, if you will. Now he is again in front of Lysias, and now he is with the Jewish council, the Sanhedrin. And that's in chapter 23. We looked at that last time. As chapter 23 moves on, we didn't really spend much time with this, but it comes to a point where the Jews are going to try to kill Paul. And it comes to the ear of the tribune, Claudius Lysias. So Claudius is trying to save Paul, and he's trying to get him out of Jerusalem. So Paul is going to be sent in the evening and the night, brought by night, to Antipatris and then to Caesarea. And I'll just kind of put a map on here real quickly so you can see that. So Paul's going to be taken from Jerusalem. He's going to be ultimately, he's going to be brought to Caesarea, where he will stay for the next chapter or two. So we will see him now in the city of Caesarea for chapter 24, chapter 25, and chapter 26. So that's where we're going to be today. Paul is in Caesarea. He was delivered there by the tribune, by the Roman soldiers to keep him safe. And he's going to come and stand before the governor, Felix. And so he's going to be here in front of the governor, Felix, and some Jews are going to come down. You'll see here the high priest Ananias with some elders. They're going to bring a spokesman who's going to be an accuser of the apostle Paul. And so they lay their case against Paul in front of the governor, Felix. So they go ahead and lay their case, and the apostle Paul responds beginning in verse 10. So the governor nods to Paul. Governor Felix tells Paul, go ahead and make your comments. So Paul then, he denies some of the accusations, but one of the accusations that was made against Paul was that he was teaching this sect of the Nazarenes, and you'll see that back there in verse 5. They called him a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes, and Paul doesn't deny this, that he was involved in the teaching of the Nazarene or Jesus Christ. Notice what Paul says beginning in verse 13. Neither can they prove to you what they now bring up against me. But this I confess to you. So he said, I'm acknowledging this, that according to the way, which they call a sect, this is what Paul says that he was guilty of. I worship the God of our fathers, believing everything laid down by the law and written in the prophets. He then continues, having a hope in God. Now, what was the hope that he had? It was that there will be a resurrection. And the interesting part of that, if you remember when we saw him before the council, last time in chapter 23, part of that council was made up of the Pharisees. The Pharisees believed in the resurrection. Part of that council was made up of the Sadducees. The Sadducees denied the resurrection. But Paul here says, I am on trial, at least in part, because of the hope that I have in a resurrection. And so Paul then will continue and make his accusation, and he'll cry out here in verse 21. He'll make a comment in verse 21. Other than this one thing, again, he's talking to Felix. This is what I did. I cried out while standing among them. This is what he cried out. It is with respect to the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial before you this day. So Paul acknowledges that the reason he's on trial did have something to do with this sect of the Nazarenes, as it was called back in verse 5 there. He was on trial for this. He acknowledges that part, but he denies the other accusations that they accuse him of. He says, I am on trial for this belief that I am a teacher of the way. Now look at verse 22. But Felix, having a rather accurate knowledge of the way. Now that's the exact same word that was used back there in verse 14. Paul said again in verse 14, that he says, but this I confess to you, that according to the way, I worship the God of our fathers. Then it says here, Luke writes that Felix had an accurate knowledge of the way. So Felix had some knowledge of all of these things. So again, let's go ahead and read this, verse 22. But Felix put off the Jews who were accusing Paul, saying, when Lysias the tribune comes down, I will decide your case. So he puts off these Jews who had come to Caesarea to accuse Paul. He gave orders to the centurion that he, Paul, should be kept in custody but have some liberty, and that none of his friends should be prevented from attending to his needs. So it seems that Felix really didn't think there was anything to hold Paul for. He gave Paul these freedoms, and he puts the trial off. He delays the trial. Verse 24 says, after some days, Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish. Now, Drusilla had divorced her first husband, and Felix was more than happy to have Drusilla as his wife, this divorced woman. And so after some days, Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish. And he sent for Paul, and he heard him speak about faith in Christ. Well, that's the way, isn't it? That's the sect of the Nazarene that he was accused of. Paul does not hold back. He continues to speak in front of Felix. He continues to speak in front of his wife Drusilla about faith in Christ Jesus. Verse 25, and as he reasoned about righteousness, as he reasoned about self-control, as he reasoned about the coming judgment, do you think these three things that Paul taught to Felix would have been maybe something that pricked Felix's own heart, his own mind? That he had a wife that he was not supposed to have? That was, and so here Paul is reasoning with Felix about righteousness, self-control, and the coming judgment. And Luke says Felix was alarmed and said, go away. Go away. And then he said, when I get an opportunity, I'll call you back. I'll bring you back when I get an opportunity. Verse 26. At the same time, we see again here that Felix was not a man of much character, right? At the same time, he hoped that money would be given him by Paul. So he was really wanting to hold Paul kind of hostage, right? Get a little bit of money for himself. So he sent for him often and conversed with him. How long did this happen? 2 years, verse 27. 2 years' time, Felix did this. Eventually, he's going to be replaced by Porcius Festus, but he holds Paul in prison the whole time as a way to garner the favor of the Jews. So he holds Paul in prison in Caesarea for 2 years. And it says that Paul here would continually be brought before him. And again, he was wanting money from him. He wanted money, but he did not want the message that Paul was bringing. There's 2 points I want to make here real quickly. First of all, the first point is this. We need to be like the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul wasn't going to flatter Felix. He wasn't going to hold back any punches. He wasn't trying to garner Felix's approval and hopefully maybe get out of jail. He continued to speak the truth. It reminds us that we have to speak the truth. The truth isn't always going to be popular. The truth isn't always going to make people appreciate us. When we speak against, as Christians, when we teach against homosexuality, against cross-dressing, when we speak against abortion, when we speak against the killing of babies, when we speak against these things, we're not always going to be popular. But we have to we talked about this last time, we have to do the hard things. It's hard to sometimes speak the truth. But Paul wasn't going to back down from the truth as he spoke. And again, I would never encourage us to speak the truth in hate or an unkind way. In fact, the Apostle Paul would tell the church in Ephesus that we have to speak the truth in love. But we do have to speak the truth. But Paul was going to speak the truth to Felix. So there's one first application for us, that we have to speak the truth. We have to speak the hard things. We have to do the hard things. The second lesson here, the second application we're going to notice real quick, is that Felix put Paul off for an opportunity, a better time. And let me suggest to you that the best time to obey the gospel, the best time to rid yourself of those struggles, of those sins, the best time to do the things that God has called us to do, the best time is now. We may never get another opportunity. He says again, what did he say here in verse 25? Go away for the present, when I get an opportunity, I'll summon you. Let's not put off the opportunity that we have been given. Let's not put off the time that we have been given. to make ourselves right with God, to make ourselves children of God. Anyways, that is the thought for today, and I pray that you guys have a great day. God bless, and thank you for your time.